Stay dandy, baby. My Villain Academia gets incredibly intense as the League of Villains throws down with the Meta Liberation Army. And this is an episode which focuses on fan-favorite, super-ass creepy character, Himiko Toga. She's always been a very popular character, mostly for her visual design and her batshit crazy personality. But who is Himiko Toga? Why does she have such an obsession with blood? That's what we dive into in the latest episode of the series. But before we begin, let's go ahead and do the typical YouTube stuff, which is to say, I'd like you to like my videos. If you're enjoying my content, hit the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this one, video reviews, discussions, our weekly podcast show, The Powerful Nerdcast. Make sure to check out all that super awesome stuff. But if you really want to go that extra mile, consider checking out my Patreon and making a small donation. Remember, first-time donators, I'll review an anime series of your choosing. And remember, that donation goes a very long way in helping to support this channel. But as always, the best way to support us is to simply watch our content, comment on it. It's really great. I appreciate it. Let's get into this episode right here, which is nuts, to say the least. And I want to preface this before I go much further into the actual review. A lot of my commenters have been telling me that they've been making some pretty big changes to this season in terms of the order in which they're actually telling this story, details that they're managing to omit, and I've gotten a lot of requests to check out the manga version, but I'm going to wait until the end of this season to actually do that. In fact, my big plan is I'm going to try and just finish out the reviews of this season, and then I want to kind of read the entire arc in the manga and maybe do like kind of like a big discussion and talk about the differences and the changes that they made between this, because as someone who only watches the anime, I can't really see like anything wrong with what they're doing here, although I will admit that some things do feel a little rushed with everything that they're doing with this current arc, especially with the explanation of the Meta Liberation Army, as they've basically been sort of slowly talked about in the series, and then suddenly, here they are, they're a big organization, apparently there you have very large lofty goals, and the League of Villains are in their way. In fact, the episode actually opens up detailing some more information about them and how they got their start and how they were created by this guy who goes by the name of Destro, and every time I hear that, I just think of Destro from G.I. Joe. That's just the way it is. I can't help it. But the fact of the matter is, the Meta Liberation Army essentially wants to change the world by creating a massive revolution for people who have quirks, or meta powers as they call them. They don't want them to be restricted by the government. They simply just want them to be able to be used all the time, which of course, in a world with no rules, could result in just pure chaos. But who knows? It's hard to say. But the fact of the matter is, that's their overall plan. And their leader was thrown into jail, and apparently he committed suicide. And Destro did not realize that apparently he had an illegitimate son who went by the name of Re-Destro, who sort of carried on his goal of wanting to change the world itself. Hence, the Meta Liberation Army has re-emerged, and they're planning for their big revival. But the League of Villains, man, these guys have just got to go. They're going to be a big problem for them, and that's what led to this like big confrontation that's actually going on in this episode, which wastes practically no time in immediately getting right into it, as we're now in the city and the League of Villains have been brought in by Slide and Go. Again, when they introduced him in the series, he was really funny. He still manages to be funny here because his entire shtick just seems to be that he does quite literally slide around, but he brings them into the heart of the city where suddenly they're attacked by all of the members of the Meta Liberation Army, and basically it's just a bunch of rejects who have ridiculous powers who are just trying to overwhelm them in every way possible, and basically it just ends up creating a lot of chaos, and a lot of the members end up getting sort of like scattered all over the place, and this is where we get to set up all of our individual battles. And we certainly get some really great moments in this episode, but most of this one is dedicated to Himiko Toga, who again, like I said, is a very striking character. Again, her design is already very iconic, and this combined with her overall personality, which is incredibly sadistic, that with her crazy freaking expressions, make her just a very memorable character for the series. And the fact that she's already had a lot of interactions with some of the major characters of the show, such as Deku, Ochako, and a few others, again, makes her kind of a fan-favorite villain character for the series. But we've never really known anything about her backstory, where she came from, what her ultimate motivation seems to be. They've hinted at it before that her entire shtick is the fact that she has sort of like a twisted view on what love is. And this is sort of like what this entire episode is all about, and it's made even better by the fact that she fights against one of the big members of the Meta Liberation Army, a woman who goes by the name of Curious. And Curious is quite curious, I do have to say, just for the fact that her overall quirk basically allows her to turn things into bombs, whether they're inanimate objects or even quite literally people themselves. But she has a really weird, striking design with her blue skin and her weird colored hair and eyes and everything. Her overall look doesn't seem like, she would be someone who creates bombs or something. It seems like it would be something a little more out there, so to speak. But again, I like her design. It's very striking and crazy. And what's really great about her is that they dive into her personality as well, where essentially she is a journalist. She basically is the person in the Meta Liberation Army who's responsible for creating all of their propaganda. And her entire battle with Himiko Toga is remarkable, as she's not only battling her, but also sort of having a really intense interview with her at the same time. I'm trying to get at the core of who Himiko Toga really is, to try to get an understanding of her, and in many ways turn her into something of a figure for the future of the Meta Liberation Army, even if that means her death, essentially transforming her into something of a martyr. It's really cool that they managed to include this sort of heavy material in what is arguably basically just a big, no-holds-barred, awesome fight, and I really do appreciate that. But this entire battle is really intense, as basically she throws everything at Toga, who constantly keeps getting hit by all of these explosions, even to the point where she tries to use her mask and suck up the blood of other people. We get to see that Curious has infused them with her explosive powers to the point where she can't even take their blood in, and little by little, we get to see that classic, crazy Himiko Toga personality come out. And I'd go as far as to say that this episode probably has her absolute creepiest expressions of the entire franchise. There are some moments here that when you freeze frame them, get ready to shit your pants, my friends. They are pretty friggin' creepy, but I really do love it. It made me love her character all the bit more. And throughout this entire battle, as Curious is desperately trying to learn a little bit more about her, why she does the thing she does, we get some small snippets of her backstory, getting to see that when she was in middle school, this is where her true sort of personality came out, where she attacked a student, started sucking his blood, and well, that did not sit right with the current student body, as she basically ran away from home and began her new life as a villain. But we go even further back in her past when we get to see her as a child, where basically she starts to learn what her quirk is and what's so unique about it. And what's really interesting is how Himiko Toga is one of those characters who is a villain, but she was sort of created by the people around her, because while her quirk is inherently itself very creepy, just the fact that it involves blood and being able to transform into other people, it is just that. A quirk, a superpower which exists in this world. And when utilized the correct way, it could have transformed her into something of a really nice hero. But the way that everyone reacted to it is what sort of pushed her away from regular, normal human society. That's the question in this episode. What does it mean to be normal? I mean, what does it truly mean to be a regular functioning person in society who has the ability to suck on people's blood and transform into them? It's really weird, and that's something which I think is what sort of twisted Toga's mind throughout the course of the series. To her, her powers were normal. It was just a standard thing for her. She had a fascination with blood, as she had a stronger connection with it than other people. Who knows what goes on inside of her head when she's sucking the blood of someone? What she feels, what she thinks, what she sees. There's a really creepy moment where she finds this dead bird or a harmed bird. She starts sucking on its blood, and her parents immediately get freaked out by this. And it is freaky. It's really creepy to see this cute little girl with frickin' really sharp-ass teeth just vampiring a frickin' bird in her hands. To her, what she's doing is just normal, but to everyone else, it's absolutely horrifying and downright demonic to them. That's the way that they view her, and in a way, that's what sort of transformed her into the character that she is. Rejecting everybody else's normality, she's trying to find her very own, knowing that there is nothing inherently wrong with her quirk, but society has transformed her into this disturbing, blood-obsessed villain. She's trying to find what her very own version of love is, and that love means consuming the blood of other people and quite literally embodying who they are and trying to become them. That's why she's so obsessed with Deku and her encounter with Ochako. It's really freaking disturbing, I have to say, and watching Curious desperately try to bring this out of her throughout the course of this entire battle is the best thing about it. It's not the action, it's the characterization that we managed to get in this moment. And it leads to the best part of the episode, where we get to see Toga pushed to her absolute limits, where she desperately has to pull a Hail Mary. She has to utilize her quirk in a way that we've never actually seen before. And we get to see that she had a hidden vial of blood, which actually belonged to Ochako. Yes, we finally get to follow up on that amazing moment where she had a little bit more of her blood, and she uses it and she transforms into her. Now, we've already known before that basically her quirk allows her to transform into people, and that's about it. This, combined with her overall sociopathic nature, made her a pretty horrifying villain. But now we get to see that apparently quirks, like a lot of the other ones in the series, can evolve into something different. Not only can she take the appearance of people's blood that she takes, but she can actually copy their quirks. And this moment where she transforms into Ochako is not only striking and just desperate, but it's followed by an amazing scene where she's able to quite literally utilize her gravity quirk, and she touches all of the other villains and manages to make them float up in the air, including Curious, in a great moment. Curious has this like weird weapon that she can form around her fist, and she tries to like blast Toga with like a massive explosion, but since she's able to use Ochako's ability to use gravity on her body, the explosion sends her flying into the sky, and we get this fantastic moment where little by little we get to see that Ochako's form is sort of melting away from Toga's face. Like one half is Ochako, the other half is Toga, and then she releases the ability, and all of the guys that she was fighting against, including Curious, just fall out of the sky to their deaths with a massive explosion of blood in the air. This was amazing. This is the best moment of Season 5, in my opinion, and it all came from a batshit crazy villain. And wow, it's finally great to finally get a little bit of characterization for Toga. I think that's really awesome. She's much more than just a striking character design and a creepy looking character. She has depth now, which I think is actually pretty freaking incredible. And I would love to hear your guys' like thoughts and theories and just discussion all about Toga, because she was truly the star of this episode. But her evolving her quirk is kind of like one of the big themes of the episode, as we get to see a number of other villains actually doing that. Shigaraki, of course, is actually starting to show off some of his skills in this episode, where he's just constantly being chased by all of these guys who want to kill him, and he's able to use a brand new form of his ability, where before he would just touch like a single person and they would start to disintegrate. Now apparently he can do that with multiple people at once, as long as they're all sort of like casually touching each other. He can sort of like just take out all of these people at once, and this is basically, we're starting to get to see the League of Villains quirks are starting to manifest in a lot of different ways. They even managed to set up some other really cool fights for the episode, like Dobby, who's going to be fighting against some sort of ice guy, which is, you know, absolutely perfect. That's just the way that it's actually going to be. And I love the guy that Dobby is fighting against. He basically reminds me of Iceman from Mega Man. He even has like the whole, you know, sort of like giant coat and everything. And he has some really cool ice powers, which are a little different from Todoroki's. He's actually able to create like a giant ice dragon, and it can withstand all of the power of Dobby's attacks, which is really awesome. And they're building up more of that fight, which Dobby is totally grooving on. Mr. Compress is just like really freaked out over everything that's going on. So is Spinner. And then we have Twice, who looks like he's going to be a way more important character in the next episode of the series. Twice has always had an interesting relationship with Toga. They've always seemed to be like really close with one another, and he gets really freaked out when he finds her, because after her battle, she basically goes to collapse and pass out. And he ends up finding her, and then we get to see that he's attacked by this other villain, another member of the Meta Liberation Army, who goes by the name of Skeptic, who seems to have the ability to transform human-sized objects into clones of things. And this is sort of like the perfect antithesis to Twice himself, as he creates a lot of clones of you know, himself when he's not wearing his costume. And this is definitely going to mess with Twice's head, as he already has a massive complex of trying to realize if he was actually a clone or not himself. So basically the episode ends with the possibility of them actually trying to bring Twice into the Meta Liberation Army. It's pretty freaking crazy, and it's a nice stinger for this episode, and I really love that they're going back to a character like him, because like I said, his relationship with Toga was interesting. We're going to get to see a little bit more of that in the next episode, but the fact of the matter is, this episode was explosive, it was violent, it was thought-provoking, and it was a great deep dive into Himiko Toga as a character. So, what's the rundown on this episode of My Hero Academia? I loved this episode. I think My Villain Academia is the best thing to happen to the franchise in a long time. It makes me wish they would allow us to spend more time with the villains themselves, as they're just so drastically different than anything else that we actually see from the story. This conflict with the Meta Liberation Army, too, is just pretty freaking awesome. As I've said many times before, I think it's always really awesome when you have sort of competing villain groups battling against one another, because they just don't play by the rules. They just do things their own way, and the battles always manage to be just that little more intense. Who's crazier than the other character? That's kind of the vibe that I got from this episode, especially with the character of Curious battling against Toga. The yin and yang between these characters I thought was really interesting, and I was kind of hoping we'd get to see a little bit more from Curious, but she definitely had what was coming to her. She was a total bitch throughout this entire episode, especially with the fact that she was utilizing a lot of her comrades to take down Toga, all in the name of trying to basically turn her into something of an icon for the Meta Liberation Army. And, of course, for the fact that she just seemed kind of sadistic herself, seeing these two crazy characters go at one another. But again, it was Toga who was the real star of this episode, featuring some amazing creepy visuals from her, diving into her personality and backstory in a really interesting way. It's very obvious to see why she's one of the fan favorite villains from the show. It's not just her creepy design, it is that backstory, and it works so well. It makes me hope that every member of the League of Villains, or at least the ones who are currently right here and are going to be having some really big fights, are going to be getting sort of the same treatment in terms of their backstory. But even if they're not, I'm just excited to continue to spend time with all of these characters. I think the moment that was probably my favorite, though, was when she did transform into Ochako and did that moment where she was able to utilize her powers and showing us that their powers are indeed evolving. It was a great way to sort of shoehorn in some of the hero characters in this arc, because, again, this is focusing entirely on the villains. They are not even cutting away to anything that's going on at UA. It's all clearly focused on everything that's going on in the villains here, and I love that focus. So, again, like I said at the beginning of the review, though, the whole thing about this, doing things its own way and not necessarily following the manga storyline, it's not bothering me that much. But again, I don't read the manga, so I can't really tell. And I have a feeling like that scene at the beginning where they talk a little bit more about the Meta Liberation Army, I can't tell if that's something that actually came earlier and they're just sort of inserting it into certain parts where it might make a little more sense. It's hard to say. But like I said, I do want to read this arc when I finish this one right here. And I've never done that for any other arc in My Hero Academia. I have never looked at the manga at all. I mean, the closest I guess I could say I've looked at it is if I walked into a Barnes & Noble and I looked at it and I skimmed through it for a second. But that was an older arc that I'd have already seen before. I've tried not to go forward because I just don't like being spoiled by certain things. I love to be surprised every single time there's a new episode and I don't know what's going to happen. But there it is. That's all I really have to say. I'll address it later, but for what it is right now, I am still enjoying it. I know that hardcore manga fans are probably not digging it, and I'd still love to hear more about your thoughts on all of that. But overall, I really just want to hear your thoughts about this current content right here, the anime, how you're enjoying it, how you liked this whole Himiko Toga versus Curious episode, and what you want to see next from this big My Villain Academia conflict. I think it's pretty freaking awesome. I loved this episode. It wasn't even perfect. The animation had some really wonky moments. There was a lot of still images which could have been fully animated, and while the Meta Liberation Army has a lot of members, a lot of them have some really lame powers. Some of them just don't seem like they're very interesting. It's really the main lieutenants that are working directly under Re-Destro that I think are going to be kind of interesting. But I can't wait to see more. That's really all I got to say. I'm just excited for so much more. So I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 for me. For me, it was pure entertainment value from beginning to end, and getting to learn more about the villains is always interesting. But your thoughts, I want to hear them. Sound off, comment section below. Let's talk about this episode, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff, what you liked, what you didn't like. Let's just talk about it, guys. So thank you guys so much for watching this review. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay dandy, baby.